I'm not even sure how to start this video. I'm incredibly sad and upset at what recently transpired in Uvalde, Texas. As all of you know by now, 19 children and 2 adults were killed by a crazed gunman who entered an unlocked school and unleashed a barrage of bullets. In addition to those killed, 17 were left injured, some still fighting for their lives. This video is not about the Second Amendment or what we believe is our right to bear arms. There's a time and place for this discussion. It's not now. So please, I beg you, let's not make this a political issue. If you choose to leave a comment, please do so with respect to the innocent people who died in this needless and cowardice act of violence. Why didn't someone stop this piece of shit when they had the opportunity to? And why wasn't the school on complete lockdown? These are just 2 of the many questions I have about this heart-wrenching and tragic event. I'm sure, just like you, there's many more questions to be asked. I also, like you, don't have all the answers. I'm getting my information from news media just like the rest of the world. However, as a former U.S. Marine, security consultant, and police officer of 22 years, I think that I may have some experiences and insight that helps me to better understand what's being reported. And that's going to be the basis of this short video, to take what's being reported and try to determine if it was appropriate, in my opinion, based on my experience. That said, I try to never second guess a police officer's decision at the time he or she was in the middle of a situation. An officer's actions should always be judged as the officer sees the situation unfolding at the time and not how we see it after the effect. For one to understand the shooter, and he will be referred to as either a piece of shit or shooter throughout this video because I don't think his name deserves any recognition whatsoever, crashed his grandmother's truck near the school at 11:28 a.m. At 11:30 a.m., the first 911 call was placed after the shooter fired his weapon at individuals on the street. It's been reported that the call was made by a teacher from inside the school. At 11:31 a.m., the POS enters the school parking lot and begins to fire shots at the school. At about the same time, a school resource officer, and for those of you who don't understand what school resource officers are, they're typically members of the police department, so they're armed police officers, heard the 911 call about the man with the gun at or around the school. It's reported that he arrives at the school, drives past the shooter who is hiding behind a vehicle, and encounters a teacher at the rear of the building. Now, I don't know why this teacher was even outside at the rear of the building, or the front of the building, anywhere in the vicinity if shots are being fired at or around the school. I think that teacher should have been inside trying to prepare the students for a shelter-in-place type scenario. The shooter then fires multiple shots at the school from the parking lot. So let's stop right there for a minute. The piece of shit crashed within eyesight of Robb Elementary and was seen with a long gun in hand shooting at people. A 911 call was made and several rounds of ammunition was fired into the school from the parking lot. At what point in this tense situation did it not make fucking sense to lock down this school? That school should have had a policy in place that anyone, not just a principal, vice principal, or dean, should have had the ability to immediately lock down the school if he or she felt that their children's lives were in danger. In case you missed it, the 911 call was made from a teacher who was inside the school, who witnessed the man with the gun from the school door that had been propped open by a teacher at 11:27 a.m. Now, we don't know if it was the same teacher that made the 911 call or not. I haven't heard that in a report. Now, there's some report that there was a lockdown order was placed at some point, but if it was far too late by the time it was heard by the school. The doors to that school should have been locked the entire day, whether a threat was known or not. This should be common practice and required of every school in our nation. At the very least, as soon as someone inside the school was made aware of a violent situation on or about the school grounds, the building should have been secured. Why was that school not on complete lockdown with children secured in locked rooms? This was the first and probably most important mistake in this series of missteps, miscalculations, and incorrect orders given on that day. At 11:33 a.m., the shooter enters the school and starts shooting at room 111 or room 112, unloading over 100 rounds into a classroom. At 11:35 a.m., three Uvalde police officers entered the school through the same door as the shooter. They were followed into the school by 4 more police officers. At about the same time, 2 of the police officers received grazing wounds from rounds discharged by the shooter through a locked door. At 11:37 a.m., another 16 rounds were fired in a span of 4 to 5 minutes. At 11:51 a.m., a police sergeant arrives on scene, and at 12:03 p.m., more officers continue to arrive. Okay, so let's stop there once again. The shooting inside the school commenced at 11:33 a.m. 7 police officers followed the shooter into the school. Just a minute or 2 behind the shooter, from what I understand. Maybe 3 or 4 minutes at most. But from what I understand, the shooter was not engaged by the police officers. So we fast forward 30 minutes later to 12:03 p.m. and wait for even more police officers to arrive on scene. You got that right. 30 minutes of time elapsed with what could presumably be children dying on the floor, and we've still got an active shooter in the building who has not been taken out by the dozen cops on scene. According to the Texas DPS director, Stephen McGraw, there were 19 police officers in the hallway at 12:03 p.m., just several feet outside the door where the shooter had a classroom of children begging for their lives. At 12:15 p.m., members of the Border Patrol Tactical Unit arrived with shields. At 12:21 p.m., the suspect fires again. At 12:50 p.m., 30 minutes later, and over 1 hour since the shooting began, officers finally entered the locked room with the key provided by the janitor and subsequently killed the shooter. After I put this timeline together, I literally just sat and looked at my computer for 10 minutes or so. I honestly had no idea what I was going to say or how I could talk about the events as they unfolded. Here we are as a community second-guessing the officers' actions, the actions of administrators, and the actions of those we trust to keep our children safe. It's easy to do when we have the benefit of hindsight and when our lives aren't on the line. Monday morning quarterbacks will win the game every single time because we have time to reflect and time to judge and time to react. That said, I stand by my choice not to judge fellow officers' actions that he or she felt was necessary at the time the event was unfolding. But I think this must be different. I think someone needs to be judged for their inactions and their ability to understand the gravity of the situation they were forced by their career choice to accept and deal with in a manner that would preserve the most lives. One of the media outlets, and I've watched so many videos, showed an interview with one of the police commanders who stated that the officer in charge of the incident made a mistake. He made a bad call. His decision was not the appropriate one. How do you chalk up the deaths of 21 people to, oops, I'm sorry, I made a mistake? I believe it was the same interview with the same speaker who said the situation was changing and that it went from an active shooter to a barricaded person. He wanted the believers to believe, or the viewers to believe, that a change in tactics was called for because the shooter may have been trying to commit suicide by cop. And that's a term that you're probably all familiar with. It's where a suspect takes an action that he hopes will cause the police officers to shoot and kill him. Thus, he committed suicide by a police officer shooting him or her. So I go back through all of my training in the Marine Corps, with the State Department, in the police department. And I'm trying to remember at what point I was ever instructed to change my tactic when I think innocent children may be hurt or dying. I'm trying to think back to when I was taught to think of the shooter who may want me to kill him before I think about the children he just shot. And for the life of me, I can't think of one fucking time that any instructor ever told me not to encounter the threat, neutralize the threat, and save lives. Never was I told to stand around for an hour while children, or anyone for that matter, lay dying just feet away from me. Prompt and essential first aid in the initial minutes following the shooting may have been instrumental in saving countless lives. Who knows how many children died because police officers and first responders weren't able to treat them? You, like I, and everybody else in the country, we want to blame someone. And someone needs to be held accountable for the decisions that were made during this unspeakable and tragic event. Do we blame the individual officers for not following orders and potentially ending up as victims themselves? Do we blame the unit commanders? Do we blame the school administrators? Do we blame the teacher who propped the door open? I think right now the only person we can blame is the piece of shit who committed 21 acts of murder. Maybe in time we'll have answers that will cast blame on others. Maybe things will change, but unfortunately I fear we're going to continue to see more school shootings in the future. How many innocent children and educators must die before someone decides to put our children first? Many years ago, and this may have been sometime after the Columbine shooting, I was asked as a security consultant by a school corporation to submit a plan to improve their physical security. And after days of inspections and research, I submitted my plan. I was given a handshake and a warm thank you, and that was about it. Never heard from them, so I called them a few weeks later to inquire about the proposal and was told it was just out of their budget to make the improvements I recommended. But the new multi-million-dollar football stadium evidently fit nicely into a different budget, I suppose. It's time for school corporations and school administrators to remember that the most important asset they have is our children, and no amount of money should be too much to keep them from dying. Until next time, God bless you and your family.